It started like all the others. The slam of a door, the slow, venom-laced pacing, the tension that coiled in the air like a storm waiting to strike. He expected the usual. A raised voice, tears, something he could control, twist, use. He circled the room like a hawk over prey, waiting for me to scream back, to cry, to collapse, to break, because that's where his power lived, in my collapse. But I didn't collapse. I sat there, still, breathing, present, not passive anchored. His words cut through the air like thrown daggers. Insults, accusations, twisting half-truths into weapons. Each one designed to tear at the seams of my sanity. But I didn't flinch. Not because it didn't hurt, because I refused to bleed for him again. My silence was not weakness. It was armor, a stillness forged from every sleepless night. Every apology I gave for things I didn't do. Every time I shrank myself to keep the peace. And now, peace was the weapon. The one thing he couldn't touch. He threw thunder. I stayed the mountain. He needed my chaos, my eruption to justify his destruction. But I denied him that. And in doing so, I watched something shift. His voice cracked under the weight of his own noise. His pacing turned frantic. He wasn't in control anymore. Because I wasn't dancing to his storm. Silence echoed louder than anything he'd ever screamed. And for the first time, he had nothing to fight against. He needed me to rage, to cry, to fall apart. But I just breathed. And in that breath, I reclaimed my power. He feared my calm, because it meant his chaos had no home here anymore. And without my reaction, he was just noise in an empty room. He was magnetic, the kind that draws a room in without effort. Eyes sparkled just right. Words landed like poetry. A tilt of the head, a self-deprecating smile. And suddenly he was the misunderstood genius, the broken boy begging to be loved right. To most, it was breathtaking. To me, it was rehearsed. I saw the symmetry in his chaos, the pattern in every tear he shed on cue, the rhythm in every apology that came too quickly, too perfectly timed, as if he had rehearsed it all in a mirror before walking in. Because he had. But I wasn't the audience he expected. He mistook my stillness for submission, my silence for awe. But really, I was studying him like a stage production, watching each act unfold, each costume change, each dramatic confession that somehow always circled back to him being the victim. Others heard heartbreak. I heard script. Others saw vulnerability. I saw manipulation. An artist using emotion like props. He reached for the role of deep. But my soul lived deeper. And depth cannot be faked. I didn't flinch when he cried. Didn't chase when he disappeared. Didn't applaud when he returned with flowers and a speech. And that unnerved him. Because I didn't give him what he craved. Validation of the mask. He once told me I was cold. That I lacked empathy. But what he couldn't stand was that I had too much clarity, too much discernment, too much soul to be fooled by glitter and grief wrapped in lies. He was painted glass under a spotlight, beautiful until the heat revealed the cracks. And I didn't need to shatter it. I just saw it. And that was enough to make it all fall apart. The message came like it always did. A sharp, twisting sentence designed to rattle me. The words weren't new. But today, they hit differently. It was his usual. Misinterpretation masked his concern. How could you, wrapped in a "you always do this"? A moment of confusion painted as my fault. I felt the old tug, the instinct to explain, to justify, to soften the blow, to give him the benefit of the doubt, to shape my truth into something he could understand. My fingers hovered over the phone. I could feel the words forming. I'm sorry you feel that way, but I stopped. For the first time, I didn't type. I didn't react. I didn't seek to soothe him, to fix the unfixable. I sat there, silent. The weight of the words fell. But it didn't break me. It was a choice. And in that moment, I realized I had been holding on to something that wasn't mine to carry. I wasn't misunderstood. I wasn't misheard. I was misinterpreted. And that wasn't an accident. It was a strategy, a weapon. They needed me to explain. They needed my justification to stay in control, to avoid accountability. But I wasn't playing anymore. I laid the sword down. I stopped fighting a battle that was never mine. For the first time, I saw it clearly. This wasn't about communication. It was about control. And the moment I stopped explaining, I took my power back. The urge to respond, to make it right, faded. What they couldn't understand didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I had stopped begging for validation, stopped pleading for a peace that would never come. And that silence, it was the loudest declaration of all. I forgave them, again and again. It never felt easy, but it felt necessary. My heart, my compassion, was an offering I believed could heal, could inspire change. I thought if I loved enough, if I forgave enough, maybe they would see themselves the way I saw them, broken, but capable of mending. And each time, I gave them grace. The first time, it was a harsh word, a careless argument that left me in tears. But I forgave him, because I believed he didn't mean it. I believed he was just tired, stressed, misunderstood. And so I forgave, opening my arms wide like a door to a home. But when I opened that door, it only slammed shut in my face. The second time, it was a lie, a small one, but a lie that cut deep. He told me things would change. He promised, and I believed him. So I forgave again. But he didn't change. The lie wasn't an isolated incident. It became a pattern, a door that stayed locked when I turned the key. And again I forgave. And again he mistook it. Mistook grace for a past to continue, for permission to walk all over the very lines I had drawn in the sand. Each time I forgave, I believed I was giving him room to grow. But he didn't grow. He just grew more comfortable, more entitled. My forgiveness was never seen as a gift. It was seen as a loophole, an opportunity to continue without consequence. A free pass to repeat the same hurt, the same deceit, the same cruelty. I drew 1,000 lines, and each time I erased them myself. With every act of grace, I told myself it was okay, that it was a small mistake, a misunderstanding. But one day, I didn't erase it. I didn't give him permission anymore. I didn't forgive. The silence that followed wasn't cruelty. It was consequence, a consequence I owed to myself. Because forgiveness is not self-betrayal. It's not about watering dead soil, hoping something will bloom that was never meant to. It's about giving what's deserved, not sacrificing your own peace for a lie. The lines I drew weren't walls to be broken. They were boundaries, and for the first time, I kept them. Energy doesn't lie, and they felt you leaving long before your body followed. It started with small changes. You stopped asking how they slept, stopped waiting for their gaze to linger on you, stopped bending your world to match their moods. You no longer hovered, no longer checked in, no longer sought their approval in silence. And you weren't angry, you were just absent. The light that once sparked in your eyes when they walked into the room dimmed, not with rage, not with bitterness, but with something quieter. A quiet surrender, a quiet realization that you had outgrown this. They noticed. Of course they did. They felt the shift in the air, the space that expanded between you. But instead of asking, "What changed?" they asked, "What's wrong with you?" Because they didn't want to face it. They didn't want to admit that the hold they once had over you was slipping. Control doesn't question itself. It demands obedience. It demands you return to your place, return to orbiting their needs, their emotions, their whims. But you were already gone. Not in body yet, but spirit first. And the space you left behind was larger than anything they could fill. It was a shift that had been brewing long before your silence. It wasn't a snap. It wasn't an explosion. It was a steady unraveling, a quiet reclamation of self. And they couldn't grasp it, not until it was too late, because energy never lies, and your absence was the loudest truth they'd ever heard. They sought new attention, new praise, new supply, a fresh audience to feed their ego, a new set of eyes to admire the illusion they wore like a mask. But it didn't stick. No matter how brightly they shone, the spotlight felt dimmer, the applause weaker, because the performance had an expiration date, and every line they delivered had already been spoken 1,000 times before. They tried the same words, the same rehearsed charm, the same broken stories dressed up as heartbreak. But nothing landed. The new supply, they didn't react the way I did. They didn't reflect back the narcissist's image with the same intensity. The way I used to, so effortlessly, so perfectly. The mirror I held up was cracked now, and no one could see their reflection quite the same. They were like an actor performing to an empty theater. The stage set, the script memorized, but no one in the seats to applaud. The lights still blinding, but the show had lost its spark. Every word they spoke felt rehearsed, but the applause was absent. There were no gasps of admiration, no looks of validation, just silence. They tugged at the strings of the new person, their puppet, but the strings were loose now, no tension left. The control they used to weave so effortlessly was slipping through their fingers, thread by thread. From where I stood, I watched them fumble, the effort they poured into building another illusion, the frantic attempts to recreate what we once had. But it didn't work. It never would, because no one reflected them the way I did. No one was their mirror, the last real one they'd ever see. And now, they were surrounded by cracked glass and silence, a broken reflection no one could piece together again. And they didn't know how to exist in a world where their mask had finally cracked, where the stage was empty, and no one was left to applaud their performance. They needed to win the crowd. They needed the world to believe their version of the story. So they rewrote the narrative, twisting the truth until it bent into something unrecognizable. She abandoned me. She was unstable. She changed. They painted themselves as the wounded poet, the loyal lover, the misunderstood soul, a tragic character in a story they cast themselves as the victim of. They spoke in half-truths, in manipulations, in carefully crafted lies meant to turn the world against me. But they were screaming to an empty theater. I was no longer in the audience, no longer watching from the sidelines, waiting for my turn to defend myself. I had learned the most powerful thing I could do was remain silent, because silence isn't surrender, it's sovereignty. I watched as they spun their tales, hoping to rewrite history, hoping the audience would believe their distorted version. But every lie they told only amplified the truth. Their voice got louder, but my silence grew louder still. They screamed their lies into a canyon, and all they heard in return was the echo of their own deception. My absence was not a void. It was the sound of truth refusing to join the noise. It wasn't just quiet. It was unshakable. Every word they spat was a brick they laid on the foundation of their own unraveling. They didn't need me to expose them. They did it themselves, one exaggeration at a time, each distortion a thread that pulled tighter around their own credibility. And in the end, the more they yelled, the clearer the truth became, because in my silence, I reclaimed my power, and they were drowning in the lies they'd spun, with no one left to believe them. Your peace came quietly. There were no fireworks, no grand gestures, no declarations to mark its arrival. Just the slow, steady rhythm of a life reclaimed. One morning at a time, the sun filtered through the window, soft and warm on your skin. You felt it like an old friend, gentle on your face, not a reminder of what was lost, but of what you had found. The warmth filled the room, and for the first time in ages, it didn't feel like a fleeting moment. You made coffee without fear. There was no anxiety chasing your every movement, no clock ticking faster than your heart could keep up with. You poured the water, watched the steam rise, and breathed, just breathed. You read a book without the compulsion to check your phone, without the intrusive thought that someone, needed your attention. The words on the page were enough. You were enough. You went to bed without overthinking, without replaying every conversation, every moment. Your mind was quiet for the first time in what felt like forever, and it wasn't an absence of thought, but a presence of calm. You didn't need validation. You didn't need someone to tell you that you were worthy, because you already knew it. You didn't need to prove your worth, because in the stillness, you remembered it. Your revolution wasn't loud. It wasn't fueled by rage or revenge. It was the simple, profound act of resting, of giving your body, your mind, and your soul the time and space they had long been denied. That was your victory, not in the battles you fought, but in the quiet moments where you reclaimed yourself. Rest was your rebellion, and in that peace, you found freedom. They search for you, but not in your fullness. They search for a version of you, less powerful, less aware, less whole. They look for someone who will reflect them, but not challenge them. Someone who will stay, but never grow. A shadow, a replica, someone who will play the part but never step into the light. But you weren't a mask they could replicate. You weren't an image to be borrowed or mimicked. You were real, authentic, and real can't be replaced with fantasy. They tried. They found someone who mirrored a piece of you, perhaps the laughter, perhaps the kindness, perhaps the way you once made them feel like the center of the world. But it was only a shadow, a flicker, a half-light that couldn't hold the weight of truth. They wanted your reflection, not your authenticity. They wanted someone who would echo back their desires, their needs, their image. But they couldn't stand the mirror you held up to them. They couldn't stand the truth. So they searched for fire but only found smoke. Smoke that looked like warmth, but had no substance, no heat, no spark to ignite. And each time they thought they found someone close to you, it was just another shadow, a fleeting resemblance, a mirage that disappeared when they tried to grasp it. They'll never find you in someone else, because they weren't looking for you. They were looking for a version of themselves reflected in your eyes. And that's a reflection that can never love back. They're still chasing echoes, but echoes don't hold hands. They don't share warmth, and they don't love. They only remind you of what you've lost, and they can never be the real thing. You didn't come back to fix them, or to prove anything, or to gloat. You came back to you. There was no grand declaration, no need for others to witness your transformation. This wasn't about them. It was about you reclaiming what was always yours. The parts of you they tried to steal, the pieces they convinced you you'd lost. You found them again. You reclaimed your body, not as something to be controlled, but as a vessel of strength, of softness, of everything you are. You didn't ask for permission to feel, to move, to be. You reclaimed your mind, no longer twisted by their narrative. You silenced the voices of doubt they planted, replacing them with your own, a voice that had been stifled, but was now clear, steady, powerful, not louder, but clearer. You didn't need to shout to be heard. You didn't need to prove yourself to anyone. Your truth spoke for itself. This wasn't a comeback. This was a homecoming. To the parts of yourself you'd tucked away, to the dreams you'd abandoned, to the life that had once felt too big to live. It was like planting roots in soil you once feared, roots that burrowed deep into the ground, strong enough to withstand any storm, and wide enough to spread your own light. You reclaimed your peace, not by fighting for it, but by choosing it. And this time, you didn't ask for permission to exist. You let your light burn brightly, without apology, without hesitation, because it was yours, and no one could ever dim it again.